Right, I'm going to kick off today's review by measuring my own heart rate using the Pacer Manchuront because it's got a pulsometer. Right, here we go. I need to count to 30 heartbeats. Go. 10, 20, 30, exactly 65 beats per minute. Is that any good for someone who's my age, 48? Yeah, I don't know. Let me know in the comment section. I wonder if watches can actually increase or decrease your heart rate. I'm going to find that out later on in this video. But before that, I'm going to head over to the light box to tell you everything you need to know about this Pacer Manchuront. So how do you use the pulsometer on this watch? It's quite straightforward. You can see there written on the bezel, it says base 30 pulsations. What that means is you need to use this bezel and count to 30 heartbeats. You can either move the bezel so that that marker meets up with the second hand, or you can wait for the second hand to get to 12 o'clock. You start to count heartbeats. And when you get to 30 heartbeats, wherever the second hand is, it's probably going to be around here. That is the number of beats per minute that the person whose heart rate you're measuring is currently experiencing. It's a little bit different to how people would normally measure a heart rate. I think you would just use some sort of timing device to count 30 seconds. You would count the number of heartbeats in those 30 seconds and then double it. And that would give you your beats per minute. So I guess my first comment on this watch is how practical and useful is this bezel and this function going to be on this watch? I don't think it's going to be that useful, not for me anyway. Maybe for someone working in the field needing to measure heartbeats regularly, but I would have thought that person or those people would be used to using a watch or their phone to count 30 seconds, and then they would just again count the heartbeats in the 30 seconds and then double it. Is it a bit of a gimmick? Oh, I think it might be, you know. Anyway, I personally didn't really want to experience this watch because of this function. When I was offered this watch by Dylan, I was very, very keen to get my hands on it because it has a movement inside it, which I have never, ever experienced. I think it's the 9132. It is a 9000 series Miyota movement with a 24-hour subdial at the 6, which I'm not that interested in, but it has a power reserve indicator, look, at the 12 o'clock. That's pretty cool. Date complication at the 3. Look, this watch is available in 3 color variations. Black dial with a silver steel bezel insert. I believe it's steel. This one with a white dial, steel bezel, and black on black. I think if I was to buy this watch, I would have gone for the black on black. So for those of you not familiar with the 9000 series Miyota movement, beats at 28,800 beats per hour, hacks and hand winds a unidirectional rotor, so you will occasionally hear or feel the rotor spinning. I don't think you'll feel it with this watch because the case on this watch is quite thick and chunky. There's going to be quite a lot of weight in the head of this watch, so I don't think the rotor is going to necessarily be felt. You might hear it every now and then. I've not actually heard it, and I've been wearing this watch for a little while. Yeah, some of them are better than others, aren't they? Now, there is something about this watch that has really impressed me. Well, it's more so the brand and the man behind the brand. Dylan from Australia, by all accounts, he has spent 7 years getting this watch perfected, ensuring it is exactly what he wanted, visiting factories many, many times. 7 years is unbelievable. I have to give you an incredible amount of credit, Dylan, because that's a long time developing this watch. I gave up on J&G watches and Cedar watches after 18 months, so you've got a lot more patience than I do. So yeah, well done. Incredible. And you've also produced, yes, a watch with some familiar elements to it. The case, obviously, the case shape, the bracelet, but there's also a decent amount of originality to it. It's not often you see watches like this with pulsometers and power indicators, 24-hour subdials and a date complication. And yeah, I mean, it's obviously fairly familiar, but also quite original. So yeah, well done, Dylan. Incredible effort. But sadly, there are some weaknesses to this watch which I'm obviously going to cover. Now, this watch was sent to me for free by Dylan, so thank you so much, Dylan. Hence, you would have seen the includes paid promotion icon in the top left-hand corner. Doesn't mean the video was sponsored. That does mean something else. But yeah, I don't need to return this watch. and I'm still going to be giving you all the good and all the bad. Let's start with some good, shall we? Packaging, incredible, yeah, unbelievable packaging. Obviously, a lot of time and effort has gone into choosing the packaging, the branding, the booklet, the tools, the half links, because you've got a butterfly clasp on the bracelet. Yeah, impressive effort. Great website as well. So it's clear that it's not just time been spent designing the watch and making sure it's made to the sort of levels or standards that Dylan expect. There's a lot of work that's gone into all the other elements that surround having a watch brand. Steel finishing looks nice. Polishing is nice. There's 3 color versions available. This one, a black dial with a steel bezel insert and a black on black. I think if I was to buy this watch, I would have chosen the black on black. I love ceramic bezel inserts. Love the shine. Not a massive fan of steel bezels like this, especially when they're quite wide. And yeah, that bezel insert is quite prominent, isn't it? So yeah, it's within proportions, I think. It doesn't look bad. I just think it's perhaps a bit thicker than I would prefer. So yeah, I would have gone black on black, I think. Awesome movement as well. Great choice with the movement. Miyota 9132. And I love power indicators as well. There's something about undoing the crown, winding up the movement and seeing that needle move. Yeah, it's quite satisfying, isn't it? I'm not wild about 24-hour subdials. So yeah, that's not something I'm that bothered about, but reasonable balance to the dial, isn't there? Branding within that 24-hour subdial, and you've got the date window at the 3 o'clock. It's wouldn't say it's the prettiest watch I've ever seen. That power indicator, although I like them and they are useful, just looks a bit weird, doesn't it? Almost looks a little bit sort of cyclopsy, the watch. This particular colour version though, very legible, black hands on a white dial. I'll check out the lume at the end of the video. I'll show you the usual 5-minute lume degradation test. And as you would expect with a watch costing as much as this one does, the rest of the specifications are decent. Solid end links, solid links, screw pins, sapphire, crystal, yeah, all the good stuff. Screw down case back, a screw down crown, 100 meters of water resistance. The bezel action, we start to come on to some of the weaknesses, some of what I would consider to be the weaknesses. You've got 120 click bi-directional bezel action on this one, and it is not good. Unfortunately, I don't know if this is one that just got through quality control, but it just feels a bit rough. The clicks are not particularly crisp, and there is a lot of wobble on that bezel. Yeah, it doesn't feel well seated at all. Yeah, it just moves around a lot. Yeah, I'd have a chat with a factory that is responsible for that, Dylan, if I were you, because that's not great. Other tolerances on the watch are good. Bracelet tolerances are good. You want a little bit of jangle, so it sort of conforms to your wrist. Yeah, not too much, but just the right amount, I think. The end links fit perfectly. Very little, if any, movement with the end links. Obviously, you've got male end links, look, so it's going to extend the case. Decent amount of downturn, though, so it is going to fit average and smaller than average wrists, actually. And there's plenty of removable links. You've got half links as well, which is a good addition because there is this butterfly clasp. I'm not wild about this very thin, cheap looking. It doesn't feel cheap because, again, the tolerances are pretty good. But I just think that looks quite thin. And when we see thin metal like that, I do equate that with sort of cheapness, I'm afraid. I would prefer for that not to be there. I don't like the look of it either, I'm afraid. But a butterfly clasp with an all stainless steel sports watch, oh, I'm a little bit disappointed about that as well, I'm afraid. And the thickness of the watch as well. I have been wearing this watch, as I've already mentioned, and it does feel top heavy, despite having solid links and, well, what looks like a fairly substantial clasp underneath my wrist. There's a lot of bulge to that case back, which I think sits the watch a little bit higher on my wrist, only fractionally, but just a little bit higher on my wrist than it would if it was a flat case back. I know that these sort of petals are supposed to help with aeration and sweat removal and all that sort of stuff. But it is also quite a thick watch, a fairly substantial bezel as well. So it does feel top heavy, I'm afraid, and it does feel like it wobbles around on my wrist a little bit, which is a bit of a shame. Decent dimensions. I like the dimensions. I like the size. It's just, Yeah, a touch too thick and heavy on top, I think. And there is just one more piece of constructive criticism. I've already mentioned the steel finishing on the watch is good, and overall it is good, but on the lugs, you've got a mix of circular brushing and longitudinal brushing. Circular on the top surface, longitudinal on the curved portion. They also meet, and that join isn't the tidiest. Yeah, I think watches should have one or the other, either circular brushing or longitudinal, and I think this particular case suits longitudinal brushing only. Right, while I wrap it up, I'm going to show you the lume degrading, and I'm also going to show you the watch on my roughly average sized wrist. As I've already mentioned, it feels a touch top heavy. The bracelet does taper down to 16 millimeters, which I like, but that just means there's not a huge amount of weight under the wrist, and the case is fairly substantial. It's quite thick, so it does feel top heavy, unfortunately. The lume, though, I think that's better than average. It's holding out pretty well, even though it's 5 minutes. It's still enough to give us some indication as to whether or not the lume is any good. And yeah, I've got to say on this occasion, it looks pretty good. So it's been a really mixed review of this Pacer by Montcharent. Yeah, I've got to give Dylan a huge amount of credit. He's done a fantastic job with his branding. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing what this brand produces in the future. On this occasion, I don't think this watch is for me. I'm not the sort of person that would find this complication on the bezel that useful, and I think the watch looks good, but I'm not completely convinced by the way it looks. The build quality is decent, but that bezel action is disappointing, and yeah, for this sort of money, there's a lot of watches on offer, isn't there? This particular price point, it's very, very competitive. So yeah, on this occasion, it's nice, but it's not one that I would look to buy. But I can see why some people might be interested in it. Cool movement, very cool movement. Right, as always, guys, massive thank you from me to you for tuning in.